Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us again here on FRC Media. As we head toward the summer officially beginning this past weekend, we're getting closer and closer to the 2020 election season. Of course, we know that the presidential race will be on the ballot in November, but there are a number of local and regional races that are going to be on the ballot as well. Many of them will be on the ballot on September 1st for the state primary. One of those is the race for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. Congressman Joseph Kennedy, as you may know, not seeking re-election in this race. He is going to be running for Senate against Ed Markey for the Democratic nomination in September. There are 9 Democrats and 2 Republicans vying for the 4th Congressional District seat. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be speaking with every one of those candidates. And we're starting right now. I'm pleased to be joined by Ihssane Leckey. Ihssane is one of the Democrats running for the 4th Congressional District. Ihssane, thank you for joining us. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to being on with us here in Fall River. Let me ask you, first of all, Ihssane, just for people who don't know who you are, just give us a little background about yourself, a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in running for the 4th Congressional District.
Thank you. Well, I am originally from Morocco, like many immigrants in Fall River. I came here seeking an opportunity, an economic opportunity, and seeking freedom and dignity. I grew up to a public school teacher and a farmer. My dad passed away when I was 13 years old because we could not afford his medication. And the opportunity for me to come to America and embrace it as my country was just an opportunity for life, for another chance at life. But as soon as I got here, I realized that opportunities are not afforded to just anyone. I immediately dived into the poverty spiral. I immediately started to have the struggle that many in Fall River understand of finding a home you can afford, healthcare you can afford, a dignified education without the burden of loans. But throughout that time and throughout that hardship, I realized that there are millions of Americans who go through that every single day. And yet we live in the richest, most powerful country in the world. So we had to do something about it. I put myself through community college and earned a Women in Math scholarship to go to Boston University. And in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008, I watched, like, again, many of our community, especially in Fall River, that our government decided to bail out the big banks and leave the people, the working families, jobless and homeless. And I wanted to fight back for us because I understand the struggle of our community. I became a Wall Street regulator. I joined the Federal Reserve and started fighting back those big banks to make sure they never gamble with our economy again and they never take our public money as blank checks again. And to also think ahead and prepare proactively to what could be worse financial crisis. That job, unfortunately, when Trump took office, started to get watered down and dismantled because those same players on Wall Street are his friends that he's trying to give a bonus to and to keep them and their wealth at the top.
Yeah.
So here I am fighting again through Congress.
Right. Let me ask you, Ihssane. I know this may be, a general type question, but you talk a lot about those that are disadvantaged on your website and helping those people out. Is there one issue that really emboldens you more than another that is going to be part of this campaign?
I believe that we definitely have to serve the communities who are most vulnerable in our district. This district has a very interesting construct. Many call it gerrymandering. We have some of the towns that are the wealthiest in the country, coupled with some of the towns that have struggled over generations. But the opportunities that have been provided have also been skewed. So the issue for me that I would like to work on as soon as I'm in Congress is to make sure that cities like Fall River, like Taunton, like Attleboro, and many others who have been disadvantaged, that they get priority as we go into a green economic recovery plan from the COVID-19 pandemic, as we go into another Wall Street reform, and as we go into building a strong economy that focuses on each person's needs and basic human rights, from healthcare, from education, from clean air and water, and from a job with dignified pay.
One of the items that comes up, and we're going to be conducting these interviews with the candidates over the next 4 or 5 weeks, and there may be some items that come up depending on the news that may be forefront for most people. But one of the things that has come up, and we'll talk about COVID-19 in a moment, but one thing that has come up that has been more on the forefront in the shorter period of time is, of course, the killing of George Floyd and the racial tensions that have resurfaced across this country. What are some of the plans that you have in terms of either police reform, defunding police, or what can be done as a congresswoman in Washington to address the need of these racial disparities that we continue to see across the country?
So as you may know, I've been running my race for over a year now. I was originally a challenger of Congressman Joe Kennedy because I wholeheartedly believe in our democracy, and I believe that representation matters. Coming from the background that I come from and being the only woman of color on this race, I had focused my platform on addressing the systemic racism issues that we have in our country. I've met across our districts with people of color, with Black communities, with transgender people of color as well. And we sat down and we talked about every single policy that I've listed on my website to make sure that it centers their voices and their needs. Because in my opinion, when we serve the most vulnerable in our communities, everybody else will be served. Now, I understand that systemic racism isn't a trivial issue for us to resolve, but I do believe that bold structural change in our country and a commitment from the American people to truly be united with each other and to truly be in solidarity with each other will actually allow us to vote for people who would understand these lived conditions and who would not be afraid in front of the systemic racism that we have in our policies, will not be afraid to fight off the biggest bigots in our governments at every level, and to really deliver that America that is inclusive and that is uniting. And so that's what I look to do in terms of systemic racism. And I'm aware that you asked me about police brutality in particular.
Yeah.
So look, I come from a country where that's something I've personally experienced in my family. In the 70s, my uncle wrote political poetry, and he was kidnapped by the secret police, and he was tortured. And he never became the same person again. We basically have lost him to mental illness after that. And when I was in high school, I organized a peaceful march. And as soon as I walked out with my friends, the police beat us up and they took my friends away. And so I came to this country to not relive those same conditions, and to see every time I would see a sign that there is such threat to our freedom of speech and of our freedom of individuality and of opinion and of identity, that I will fight it back. I think what's happening with police brutality, especially in our communities, in the 4th district as well, has got to stop. And if that means that we defund the police to reallocate resources to education and to reallocate resources to community services that would actually be intercultural and understand the needs of the people in those communities, then I would support that.
Shifting gears now to COVID-19, let me just first ask you, how difficult has it been, even though it's been well over 3 months now, to not be able to conduct the normal type of campaign you would normally be conducting right now in terms of going to a lot of public events within the district and actually meeting people face to face. How difficult has that been in terms of your campaigning over the past 3 months?
Well, for a while we were all indoors, and as you know, on the Zooms, we've organized town halls to make sure that we are addressing the issues as they happen. We organized town halls for the indigenous community when they were threatened that their land would be stolen from them again. And we've organized across the district via Zoom. But that definitely does not replace the human contact. And I've always said I am a hugger. I always offer a hug. And that's something I miss to have with my constituents and my community. But throughout the Black Lives Matter movement, I've been out there, especially in the streets, marching. I've kneeled countless times for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and felt both the pain that came with losing such lives, even before George Floyd, and also I felt the hope and the opportunity in such an intergenerational, interracial movement that is taking to the streets and demanding that we bring on a better representation in every office, including this one.
Now, in terms of the pandemic, obviously there are some things that we have all learned throughout this entire process. When you're a congresswoman in Washington, what have you learned in terms of policies, either things that have gone well or not so well, either from the president or Congress or others, that you feel this country can learn in terms of dealing with not only another pandemic, hopefully we'll never see one, but also handling some of the disparities around the healthcare issues specifically that may have cropped up through this pandemic process?
Well, look, I'm a Wall Street regulator, and part of my job was holding the biggest banks and biggest corporations and their CEOs and the profiteers accountable and stopping them from embezzling from our economy and from the working families. And in that work, I also spent a lot of time across regulatory, federal regulatory agencies to actually think ahead of what could be the worst case scenario for our country and plan ahead. That same planning and thinking that we did in the financial world and financial parts of the economy should be expanded to other parts, including healthcare. What if we face another virus? We need to be ready. We need to have PPE. We need to have enough nurses. We need to have enough staff who can join in emergency. We need to have enough hospitals. We have areas that have hospital deserts. We need to be well prepared. And quite frankly, our healthcare system was already broken because, as you see, the effects of COVID-19 had majorly hit the communities of color, the communities who have been denied healthcare for generations, and who have therefore developed pre-existing conditions that made them even more vulnerable to COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19. So what I'm advocating for when it comes to the healthcare system is, number one, Medicare for all, a single payer healthcare system that makes sure that every American gets healthcare. And number two is a proactive approach to think critically about the risks that could hit our healthcare system and address them before they actually happen, so that we're always ready and we keep our communities safe and healthy.
You know, some other disparities are also found in education. Again, with the pandemic, schools K through 12, they all went remote, they all went online. We still don't know in many instances what school will look like in the fall. As I've said with other issues, we've learned a lot on how we can stretch ourselves in some ways to try to do things differently. But in terms of education and education reform, what are some plans that you have that may have changed since COVID-19 and helping all those who want an education can receive one?
Well, as a mom of an age-schooled child, my daughter is in second grade. She just graduated today via Zoom. But one thing that I saw, in speaking with communities who have been affected from the education side, is that not every child has a computer. Not every child has broadcast, has access to internet. And in the richest, most powerful country in the world, all children should have a high quality education. It shouldn't matter if you live in Fall River or in Wellesley to be able to have that high quality education, no matter the circumstance. And as I saw, some of the jobs that were actually first cut were the jobs of educators who were supporting children with special needs, supporting children who needed a safer environment. And those were the jobs that were cut first. And that is concerning to the health of our children, not just the academic achievement. But that's, when I came to Fall River and I spoke to parents about the conditions of education in the Fall River school system, I was disheartened because I have survivor guilt. I'm a mom who moved to Brookline because I wanted good schools for my child. But I feel that just because I was able to work my way out of poverty to send my child to a good school, that I have a responsibility and a moral obligation to deliver to all communities, including Fall River, that their children would also get to go to great schools.
Mm. In terms of income inequality, that's always been an issue, and sometimes that dovetails into taxation policy. And I know that you're looking to initiate some sort of very progressive tax strategies that would focus more on those that have the wealth to contribute more to our society. Correct?
That's right. I believe that the richest people in our country have to pay their fair share. Jeff Bezos has to pay his fair share, and I believe that in our community of the Fourth, especially where we have some of the wealthiest people in our country living in our districts, I believe that those people, should be in solidarity with communities who don't have and who need to have the economic opportunity to achieve success in their lives. I believe that every time we have talked about Medicare for all, about the Green New Deal, about getting corporate money out of politics, about the transportation system that links our communities in the Fourth District to economic opportunity, or schools, or affordable housing. Every time we talked about these issues, before COVID-19, we were asked, how are we going to pay for it? But look at us now. With COVID-19, the first players who got trillions of dollars in blank check bailouts are corporations. And that's because those corporations have a lot of political power. We have a government that is regulated by Wall Street, and we have to flip that equation. We need a government that regulates Wall Street and that makes Wall Street and its executives pay their fair share in taxes.
One of the things that a congressman or congresswoman will need to take care of is a lot of the issues you talked about, a lot of the domestic issues. However, foreign policy will also play a role as being a member of Congress. What are your general thoughts in terms of U.S. foreign policy, and how can it be improved upon?
Well, in many ways, we need to be the promoters of peace that we have promised the world to be. When I lived outside of the United States, I've always thought of this country as a country that promotes peace. I thought of the Statue of Liberty as a statue that signifies that everyone is welcome in this country, and that it's built by immigrants and by people who come from across the world believing in that American dream. I think that we can do that. We can achieve that together. And the way we do that is to stop bombing people and to start investing in in environmental justice here at home and across the world. The number one threat to our world is the environmental and climate emergency. And so we're going to have to be able to create coalitions internationally to make sure that the air we breathe and the water we drink are healthy and they're not killing our children. And to do that, we need people who come from the intercultural background, who come from a background that is centered around justice. And I do bring that, I'm not to brag, but I do speak at least 4 languages. I've been around. I can speak with the Arab world and with the European world and with the American world, and we can bring people together to the same table to plan out how we can be promoters of peace.
As we get closer now to the election, a lot of talk has focused on the election itself, both in the primary on September 1st and the November 3rd, rather, general election. A lot more has been talked about in terms of mail-in voting, having the ability of many of us in Massachusetts to not need to stand in line to cast a ballot in the fall. What are your thoughts about mail-in campaign and just making it easier for people to vote in general?
I think it's a great opportunity for our country right now to make voting more accessible to folks. I think we have to be diligent to make sure that we're not suppressing voters, that everyone has access and has the information they need to be able to vote and vote on time. I think this pandemic had definitely been a challenge for all campaigns. And for us, we are committed to making sure that all voters understand how to vote, when to vote, and they do it in a safe way.
One of the things that we're hearing more and more about during every election cycle, and it's been going on for probably well over 20, 25 years now, is the level of partisanship that has reared its ugly head in Washington. As one member of 435, if elected to Congress, how can you help bridge that divide and try to get more partisanship between the two parties?
Well, first, we need to bridge the divide within our own Democratic Party. We need to actually try to get on the same page and try to commit to bold systemic change. And to do that, we have to really stop taking money from corporate PACs and corporate lobbyists and fossil fuel executives. We have to actually have the interests of the people at 100%. And to do that, it takes commitment, it takes hard work, and it takes honesty and trust. Our people are starting to lose trust in our government. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to step in, because as a Federal Reserve regulator, I was asked to report, even on my mortgage, who do I have the mortgage with? And even when my mortgage gets sold, I had to report who was it sold to, so that I don't have a conflict of interest with the banks that I was regulating. And to hear that we have representatives who are personally invested in the same corporations who are polluting our air and water, that's concerning to me, and we have to stop that. But I am one who sits at the table and works really hard on finding where we can come together as a country. I believe that no matter the color, purple, blue, red, green, we are one people, and we can sit at the table and have a conversation and do something that helps the most vulnerable in our communities. I think that bipartisanship is necessary. And I do think that it definitely stops where justice is broken.
One of the interesting aspects of the Democratic primary is that of the 9 candidates, 6 of you, and you're one of them, live in Brookline. 2 live in Newton, and the other candidate lives in Wellesley, which is in the northern part of the district. I can only imagine how those votes are going to get split up, particularly in Brookline with 6 of you residing there. But how do you get the word out to the rest of the district? And, there may be some in the Fall River area, Attleboro, Taunton, the southern part of the district that may appear to be disconnected because so many of you and even past representatives, Congressman Barney Frank, Congressman Kennedy, were all from that Brookline, Newton area. There sometimes appears to be a disconnect. How can you bridge that disconnect to make sure that the needs of a city like Fall River are met?
I think the biggest disconnect that we've had in representation is with the lived experiences of the working families and the working class. I think that we haven't had a representative who actually had been through the spirals of poverty, who understands the conditions that people have to go through when they can't have healthcare, when they can't have even, I've met a woman in Fall River who told me that she couldn't actually have pictures for her child. She could not afford pictures for her child. That's not a condition that we've had somebody, feel and go through. I've been there. I've been there before, and I understand what it's like to have to not have access to these basic things, let alone calling on the first time I felt that oppression, that systemic oppression of poverty, is when I was on the job and I was in a car accident. And the first thing I asked is to please do not call the ambulance, because I was afraid of deportation and I was afraid of the thousands of dollars in medical debt that's going to follow. And that's why I'm advocating to cancel medical debt and cancel student debt and give people another chance at life and at growth and at an opportunity to live with dignity in our very wealthy country. So I believe that I am one of the Fall River community, and I'm one of anyone across the district who has been through hardship. I know we have people in Brookline and in Newton who live in public housing, and they do not live the privilege that many live in Brookline and Newton.
As we have about a minute or so left, I'll give you the opportunity to say another few words to the voters of Fall River, and how can people find out more information about your campaign?
People of Fall River, I love you. I want you to know that. I've started this campaign last year as a challenger because I believe that our complacent politicians have to be challenged. And I also believe that even when they mean well, when they don't have the lived experiences, they just come short in what they fight for. They come with a lot of excuses of what they could do and what they could not. But right now is not the time for half measures. Right now is for people who actually can be Trump's worst nightmare, like myself, being a woman of color, being an immigrant, being a Muslim, being a mom, and being a Wall Street regulator who has fought those big corporations that Trump is trying to give them more blank checks. So I'm asking you to vote for me on September 1st. Go to my website, ihssane.org. It's IHSSANE.org, and sign up to volunteer. If you can give a small donation, do that. It'll help with the cost of mail. But most importantly, vote on September 1st, and I'll see you there.
Ihssane Leckey, a Democratic candidate for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking to the people of Fall River. We wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank you for joining us here on FRC Media for hearing out the candidates. We'll be speaking to all the candidates running in the 4th Congressional District over the next few weeks to hopefully get you informed as you head to the ballot box on primary day, September 1st. I'm Keith Sewell. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.